Okay, I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt Show Aviad Goz, who has represented Franklin Covey in Israel since 1999. He specializes in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I must say is one of my favorite books, and he has taught the concepts in Israel hundreds and hundreds of times. Aviad, tell me something. When you got started teaching the 7 Habits, did you know Steven Covey?
No, not at all. Actually, it all started by me just purchasing the book right after it was translated to Hebrew. I was very fascinated by the book and the ideas. And in the end of the book, it said that you can purchase a diary based on the system. So I actually sent them, at the time it was a letter, trying to purchase the diary. But I signed Aviad Goz Momentum Training. And so they replied and said, "Are you a training company?" I said, "Yes." "Are you based in Israel?" I said, "Yes." And they asked, "Would you like to represent us?" So I said, "Yes, it's great ideas, great wisdom." So this is how it started, really. And then I went to study the system, the course, and then I met also Steven Covey a few times.
So tell me, there are 7 habits they always talk about. Unfortunately, in just a few minutes today, we're not going to cover all of them. But which one would you say, if someone wants to get started, is probably the number one place for someone to start to become more effective?
Okay, so 7 habits are built as a journey from non-effectiveness to effectiveness. And they start with the state of being dependent, moving to a state of being independent, and then to the higher level of being interdependent. But the first habit is called be proactive. And it is the first because it's the very foundation of becoming effective. In a very short version or nutshell, being proactive means taking responsibility. Taking responsibility to initiate things, but also taking responsibility for all your responses. So whatever comes your way, the idea of proactivity is that a person has the freedom to choose their own responses, and they are responsible for their own responses.
Well, that's a pretty heavy concept, I think, in today's world, where many people, and I guess I'm sort of turning the question to something related to their own finance, but so many people think, there's nothing I can do about improving my financial situation, or the government is going to help me out, or it's not fair, and therefore there's nothing, I'm behind the 8 ball, so, and because it's not fair, and they throw their hands up and just, and never get to improve. How can someone decide to be proactive and then actually do it?
Okay, so what you have described just now is called the reactive attitude, or the victim attitude, to use a stronger word, meaning blaming everyone and everything else for your own situation. Now, although there might be some things which are right about the circumstance and the government and the taxation, what we do in the course and what the book does, it shows people what happens if this is the attitude you go in life with, and it really produces no change. So we work with people on this idea that whatever happens to you, you can choose your responses. And unless you take the responsibility, even at small, at first, nothing will change. It will actually get worse. So basically it's a paradigm. We work into trying to shift the paradigm from being a victim to being someone who sits in the driver's seat of their life, and starting even in very small baby steps to see how it works. So, as an example, I work, in the last year or two, I work voluntarily with some people, not in the usual organizational training, but people who have small businesses. And usually you find them in that state of mind of, I can't do anything, it's the government, it's the tax, it's the competition. And then you search with them what might be their area of influence, not their area of concern, which they come out of, but the area of influence. And actually the idea of proactivity originally means pro-action. Or in other words, what are the small actions, small steps you can do and prove to yourself that there can be a momentum of moving away from that. That can be taking a 1 hour extra job once a week, or initiating a small activity that will produce some extra income. But this is where it starts. But the moment the person senses even an initial success, they can begin to create a momentum. And I've seen, usually we work with large companies, but also with individuals, that if they take the proactivity idea and realize that they are responsible for their destiny and no one else is, and then to think what might be the small first actions they can do, it goes very far eventually.
We are talking with Aviad Goz, who represents the Franklin Covey company in Israel through his own company, the Momentum Group here. He has actually taught the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People hundreds and hundreds of times to executive leadership teams. Aviad, I want to bring it down a little closer to home and, in fact, even focus on something that you've been saying, which, frankly, is something that I've said to a lot of people in my day job. In real life, I am a financial advisor, and I help people manage their investment portfolios and their savings. I get to do the radio gig only once a week. But one of the things that I'll talk to people a lot about is also this concept of making small improvements. Like, you know, if someone knows he needs to save a lot of money for retirement, you can't do it all at once. But a lot of people could save 1,000 or 2,000 shekels a month at the beginning in order to get these small successes. Is that the idea that you're trying to promote?
Well, you know, if we look at the first 3 habits, the first 3 habits constitute the idea of personal effectiveness, and the next 3 constitute the idea of interpersonal effectiveness. But when you look into the personal effectiveness, and it can be applied greatly to your question, the first one says be proactive. That means take the responsibility. The second one says begin with the end in mind. In other words, define where you want it all to end up, or what is your idea of 5 years from now or 10 years from now. Where would you like to aim? And the third one is called put first things first. Or in other words, after you looked far and you defined where you want to get to, then you need, on a very weekly basis, to manage yourself by focusing on the small actions, we call them sometimes 20, 80 activities, that will get you there. So imagine that every week, that's habit 3, you sit before the weekend and you think about next week, you think about what you try to reach 5 or 10 years from now, and you ask yourself, what would be the 1 or 2 specific activities that I can do next week that will move me forward on that scale? So far looking, and then very short view into next week. So I can do maybe 2 things, and so I need to schedule them, put them in the diary, commit to myself that I'm going to do them. And although it's only 1 or 2 small activities a week, if you do it for a year, you're already in the area of 100 small actions, which create really a flywheel, creates a momentum that goes somewhere, and it's real.
And I think one of the things that the interesting point about this is these are referring to, they're not the steps that people take, but you're referring to them as the habits that people have, which means that once you get in the habit of being proactive or thinking, starting a project with the end in mind or putting first things first, you naturally become that way. You then will become more successful. And if you want to be a successful investor or save for retirement or successful in your business, I think that by simply changing your habits the way you're describing, you will in fact be well on the way, and it's not going to be a constant uphill battle. It will just become who you are, that you're the person who is very, very effective.
Exactly. And if you think about it, the opposite habits are our default habits. As an example, being reactive is a default habit, which also children have, but they have to grow and mature from that. And the second habit, by default, people want it here and now, short-term, gratification and satisfaction, and not begin with the end in mind. And the third habit, put first things first. The opposite habit, the default habit, is I'll do what is urgent. I'll do what is in my face now, pushing to be done now. So actually all of these habits are the ways people mature or can mature away from a more childish default approach into taking full responsibility of their life. And I agree, it is to develop habits. So eventually this becomes your default over time.
I think that's an excellent model. Aviad, we have now gone over the first 3 of the 7 habits, but unfortunately we're out of time. I hope we'll have a chance sometime in the future to discuss them further. But in the last few seconds, just tell me, how can people follow you and follow your work?
Okay, so Momentum Group represents in Israel Franklin Covey. We run a lot of 7 Habits courses. We can be found in www.momentum.org.il, where all our courses are published. Personally, I published 11 books. The most famous one is called Self-Navigation, which people can get over the internet or in Amazon. That spells out more the journey of self-navigation towards success.
Okay, and we will put links to all of that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Aviad Goz, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
You are listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.